turnover at halfway. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clock at 10. Adams the off balance.
Oh, my goodness. 2 on the clock.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Basketball Fix podcast. My name is Ryan Tucker. I'm the host of today's show, and we have reached what many would say is the pinnacle of our preseason previews of NBL teams, the Perth Wildcats. I am joined once again today, as I am every time, by Josh Higgins, Perth Wildcats maybe number one fan, and Jeremy Dark. Boys, how are we today?
Well, aren't we touching on probably it's a pretty easy statement, I think, personally, and the Red Army will back me up as well, boys. So don't be throwing too many haymakers out there. But the NBL25 champion contenders, and I think championship favourites maybe as well, boys. So got the greatest player of all time on their team, and I'm looking forward, obviously, to be touching on obviously what they've lost and who they've gained, obviously, in this off-season, because it's been a relatively quiet one in some obviously as well. It's been nice to obviously have held a lot of the same players as well. But champions, babies, and looking forward to it.
Did you just call Keanu Pinder the greatest player of all time, or what did you just do in your little intro there, mate? Anyway, yes, it's going to be really great.
Called Bryce Cotton, mate. There's a guy called Bryce Cotton. He'll probably go down as the greatest player of all time. Yeah, he's pretty hard to miss. He is a 6 foot sort of point guard who, you can't really see him out on the court some days, mate. But
does he come off the bench?
Champion.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, sometimes he never goes on the bench either.
Yeah. I think it's more often that than the other. But yeah,
well, it didn't play
just the 40 minutes.
Yeah. And to be fair, he'd still probably score 30 if he started on the bench and only played 20 minutes anyway. So definitely hold to your statement there of one of the up there as one of the best imports ever in the NBL. But awesome to get into Perth and start diving into these final 3 teams left heading into NBL 25. And this one is certainly going to be a cracker. It's interesting because we get to dissect the teams and sort of really work in what were they thinking in the offseason, especially when it's been a little bit on the quiet side. So going to be interesting to hear both of your thoughts, gentlemen.
Yes, exactly. And as we kind of alluded to there, the stronger teams, the teams that finished higher up in the rankings last season, a little less movement than the ones further down. So the pieces to talk about, maybe a bit more in-depth discussion about the generally small moves, but still important nonetheless. The Perth Wildcats had a quite successful 2024 season. By anybody's standards, they still, come in third in the rankings and not making the finals, but have been a consistent team for a number of years. I want to just, guys, touch on the NBL 24 season for the Wildcats. Pretty weird start, I guess you'd call it, Josh, going 2-5. It didn't really look threatening at all, but then kind of rebounded. How do you reflect on the Perth Wildcats season?
Yeah, obviously, like you mentioned, mate, it was definitely a weird and strange start to the season for the Wildcats. I think the biggest thing, obviously, was they still had sort of an import spot to sign late in this piece. They signed Christian Doolittle. Now, when he came onto the scene, I remember having a lot of conversations with a lot of my mates who are obviously major fans of the Perth Wildcats as well. And it looked like a weird signing for what the Perth Wildcats we thought needed. So, we'll touch on a couple of the guys who they've lost, and one that I'm excited to take the muzzle off and really dissect is Jordan Usher as well. But Doolittle really showed over the whole season that he was probably, the second best player behind Bryce throughout the whole entire season. So, yeah, definitely a weird season. There was obviously, a poor start, some really good runs, some really bad runs. I think they fixed a few things on the offensive end as the season went on. The defensive end was still questionable. Not a lot of rebounding ability or size inside as well. Keanu Pinder, I think, came over with a lot of hype. And I think if we were touching on signings from NBL 23's off-season, he would have probably been, I guess, the biggest signing in terms of what he probably could have produced last season in terms of what we actually got last year as a Perth Wildcats whole. So I just think it was a weird season. There was just no number 2 guy on that team last season, which is crazy to say when there's a a guy like Keanu Pinder and Jordan Usher and Ty Webster and even Corey Webster as well, from what we've seen in NBL history. So a lot of hero ball was played. It sort of reminded me a little bit of the old style Australian Boomers. Give you a little bit of hope. Paddy Mills is obviously the hero ball sort of guy. Bryce Cotton's very similar as well. But when the others wouldn't perform, that team always would tank as well. And that's what happened with the Perth Wildcats in NBL25. But it's going to be interesting because, like we've mentioned, not a lot of changes in this particular team. A few good ins, I feel like, as well. But obviously a couple of outs, I think, who are well and truly warranted of getting the boot, I guess, as well.
Yeah, Josh, I feel like you're warming up to another one of these world famous rants. So I'm a little bit scared. My palms are sweaty thinking about it. But yeah, rounding out Perth's season, I think it really was an interesting start. But they really sort of powered on and looked like they were definitely going to be there and sort of push definitely to win the championship. But for me, it just felt like they faded a little bit late in the season. And if that was, they had a couple of really uncharacteristic home losses where you think you go to the Jungle and it's probably got to be up there as one of the hardest places to play. And then they sort of suffered a couple of losses. They played a couple of games outside as well, which obviously takes away in some way, obviously, your home court advantage. And maybe it come at sort of the wrong time of the year, and they sort of seemed to struggle and didn't look as dominant and as dangerous heading into the playoffs. And then you go into sort of that longer break with ensuring their spot as one of the top two teams after the regular season. And it sort of felt like a little bit that it derailed them, and it certainly did when they come up against the Jack Jumpers in the semi-finals, because they just didn't really look like that same team that was so dominant, especially in that mid part of the NBL 24 season. So yeah, but like you said, so not a lot of movement in the off season, but they have sort of replaced a couple of guys. So it is going to be really interesting to see how they go forward and what the plan is with really, and how they're actually going to attack the NBL 25 season with such little player movement, I guess.
Well, just on the player movement, let's transition our focus now to the players that have moved in and out for the Perth Wildcats. Jordan Usher was a big name to not return to the Wildcats for NBL 25. I'd like to get your thoughts, boys, on what Jordan Usher is kind of taking with him by leaving the Wildcats, and the hole he leaves in this team. Josh?
Hearing his name, mate, sort of reminds me of listening to chalk, or, your fingernails going down a chalkboard. It cringes me out. It's embarrassing. I just have a lot of questions with Jordan, and I would actually love to sit down one-on-one and ask him what the fuck he was thinking last season. So he comes in last year, and sorry for my language, but he comes in last season with this expectation around him being a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. Now, I got excited about that, as all Perth Wildcats fans did, because we had the scoring with Bryce. We've got a guy who's come in and said, I want to be a defensive player. And I think a lot of people would have thought last season, we need a guy who can guard from 1 till 4. And I've got Keanu Pinder down low who can take the 4s and the 5s. And we've got a guy who's going to be really structurally sound for the Perth Wildcats. He was anything but that. Now, statistically wise, 1 steal over the whole season. That's okay. Scoring was okay. He shot at 12. He had 12.8 points per game, 3.5 rebounds, 1.4 assists. 2 words that I've got written down right next to those statistics were selfish and hero ball. Now, I'm sorry, Usher, and I'm sorry for any other import coming into a Perth Wildcats franchise, and especially whilst Bryce Cotton is the number 1 player on that team and even in the whole NBL as well. Don't even try and think that you are the number 1 player on the offensive end. So that's what Jordan Usher did. Now, my bin at home, my aluminium bin, has got a dent in it still from a particular game against the Melbourne United basketball team where it went down to overtime and Usher was taking the most ridiculous shots instead of giving the ball to Bryce Cotton. I went up there and absolutely kicked that thing. Yes, I get a little bit heated when we're touching on the Perth Wildcats, but I just don't understand what his vendetta was for last season. Now, we're looking at things like plus minus and all that sort of stuff as well. some of these plus minuses, boys, and I know you guys love your sort of statistics like this. Now, how does this sound for a guy who is a defensive beast and an import sort of player and a star player as well? -27, -26, -22, -19, -16, -15, -11. Now, yes, a few good pluses, and this is where you sort of look at the plus minuses and you go, sometimes they do lie. His best plus minus was a +34, a +22, a +20, a +17, and everything below that was in the low single digits as well. So the +34 game I want to touch on quickly. He had 11 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists in 27 minutes, but the team blew out that win. They had a 21-point win in that particular game. So that is where plus minus does lie a little bit. Now, I think as the season went on, he really started to go and sort of transition from a starter player. And I think the biggest call was making him a bench player. Now, they started 2-5, but you'll sort of see a little bit of a transition period where he goes from being a starter to a bench player, and you'll see the rise in wins and his production of all the players around them as well. And that comes in correlation with Christian Doolittle. But if we're looking at opposition points off the bench, sort of, and our bench points as well, as a team, it was not great. And Jez has got a couple of stats, which I'm going to throw to him in just a second, obviously, to really nail down on those particular points. But for a guy who was a defensive beast and a defensive player of the year option, he just didn't feel anything that I think most Perth Wildcats fans would have thought coming into the season. So I don't know if that's been a little bit too harsh, boys, but I think it's really good to see the back of Jordan Usher. And, you know, I've been really excited about some imports in the past, and I was very excited about this guy. He comes out and says he's Defensive Player of the Year. He dropped 34 points in game 1, I believe it was, and everyone was like, wow, if we can get a guy who can drop 20 and get a couple of steals and lock down, we are looking great. But to be honest with you guys, I think that was the worst thing to happen to the Perth Wildcats last season, him having a massive first game, because I think every game after that, he tried to replicate that, and it really showed, obviously, with some pretty disappointing games from Jordan Usher and from the Perth Wildcats as a whole as well.
I just want to let that marinate for a few seconds there, boys. It's a lot to unpack. Take a deep breath. Jez, your reaction.
Well, my first reaction to that was something you said midway through, and I'm thinking if you're trying to start a whole new Instagram social media phenomenon with "kick that thing," I think you needed to add a little sound effect in first for the whole thing to be complete. Ka-ting, kick that thing, or something like that. Maybe it's the new craze, but. Anyway, yeah, I'm with you 100% on Jordan Usher. If I look at a couple of words that I sort of put down, I just wrote no faith and a failure as pretty much the epiphany of, you could say, the project and the difficulty of bringing in imports that are going to impress straight away after their first year. Like it's obviously easy for us to sit here and discuss it and pick apart different players and organizations and different moves and changes, but very, very difficult to bring in imports and know exactly what they're going to do. And I think that's why we've given a few sort of lower grades when we've been doing these previews, because we're like, there's just too much unknown, especially with these teams that have like cleaned out their imports and brought in new ones. And this is a typical situation of, it was a failure. And you, like you said, you saw it in the minutes, and you think, okay, if he was going to be one of your best defensive guys, you look at the minutes and the faith that really had in him when you're playing in your most important games in the semi-finals, and his numbers really, really dropped. So I think that's a great indicator. When the game was on the line, really didn't have Jordan Usher in the team, and as one of these sort of key defenders that you need. So, the tenacity, the energy was there, but the follow through and the deliverance of what you're saying and what you're building yourself up to be, I think, was missing. So, I'm happy to jump on that rant with you there, Josh, and keep the Red Army happy for the moment at the start of the episode, at least.
This is insane. We didn't even get this kind of reaction or talk about the 36ers or Southeast Melbourne. We were almost too kind to them now, looking back at these.
Yeah, there's just something made about the words Jordan Usher that really start to piss me off as well. So, yeah, I don't know. I just think
Just
it
go and
was a bit
kick
of a
that thing,
worrying
Josh. Just
sort
go
of
and kick
sign.
that thing.
I need to kick something because it was a worrying sign though on the last point on Usher before we do move on as well to the next couple of players. But what was worrying for me was the fact that it took until, I think it may have been May, for the Perth Wildcats to announce that, hey, Jordan Usher has signed somewhere else. So in my head, that is me understanding for whatever reason, John really wanted to bring this player back. I don't know why, but he wanted to bring this player back because you would have announced after the end of the season, thank you for your services. We really appreciate it. On to the next one. But no, it took them up until nearly the start of preseason for them to have finally, and him to have finally signed another deal elsewhere, for them to have given up, I guess, on his hopes of playing for the Wildcats in NBL25. So I think it's a great thing. I think I'm going to touch on a few names in which I think the Perth Wildcats should target coming up when we're talking about who's some players they can potentially bring in and what are some of their needs. But yeah, to see the back of Jordan Usher again, boys, and my bin is still hurting from that day as well, and my foot maybe as well, boys. I'm very excited to see the arse of Jordan Usher.
Just I know we have a bit of time against us, but could it be more that they didn't have a replacement for him, and it's the better of two evils? Okay, if we can't replace him, we're better off having him.
I don't know if you're better off having him, to be honest, mate. I'd rather go pick up a rookie or something like that, mate, and bring someone else in. I never got it. I saw the first game, I got a little bit excited, but being a guy, I just thought, I never got it. So again, let's go back to those words: selfish player and hero ball. That's how I'm going to sum it up for Jordan Usher.
Okay, well, let's move on, give our listeners and viewers a bit of time to recuperate. Alex Sarr, picked up by the Washington Wizards. It's the second overall draft pick in the NBA draft, a massive signing, a record-making, history-making signing for the Wildcats and the NBL. Jez, I want to get your opinion on how Alex Sarr kind of fitted into the team, the Perth Wildcats, the role he played, and if he is going to be missed at all.
Look, yeah, I think I have a bit of a different opinion. We talked a lot about Sarr, obviously, in our episodes coming into the summer league and coming into the draft, and our analysis on that. But I sort of feel like he certainly played his role for the Perth Wildcats, in my opinion. We talked about defense, and yeah, those numbers that Josh was alluding to with Usher, also you can apply to Alexander Sarr, and that's with bench points. And you're looking at, say, a plus minus in bench points, and the Perth Wildcats, we definitely throw a little bit of action Josh's way about being a pretty poor defensive team. But a lot of it, I think, can come off from their bench. They were the third worst team in allowing opposition bench points. And you're often playing, obviously, your bench players against bench players in long periods of times, and you want productivity out of that. And the Perth Wildcats plus minus was, give or take, 0. So they were getting absolutely nothing from their bench, absolutely nothing positively. And you sort of say you can compare to the amount of points that they were allowing was 30 points. And you look at a team like Melbourne United, who have the depth, and they were allowing just 22 opposition bench points on average last season. So you can see sort of the difference there. And when you go from potentially Melbourne United with a bad bounce of the ball could have been the NBL champions, or a better bounce. They got a bad bounce with a long range Jack McVeigh shot that sort of turned that series, but they could have been the winners, and obviously Perth bowed out in the semi-finals. So you can see how important it is to obviously have depth, and that's something that we look into now when you're moving forward. But when it comes to back to the point of Alexander Sarr, he still played his role. If you think he played 17 minutes, and the big stat for me, he got 1.3 blocks per game, which is what he was there for. He got 4.4 rebounds, which is pretty mid-range when you're looking at, I think besides Alan Williams, the second best rebounders were, the two was it Gary Clark and Froling that had like 7.6, and they're players that are playing like much more minutes than what Sarr was. So getting 4.4 rebounds and 9.7 points, he certainly did his job, and he certainly did his chances in the draft a big positive as well. Obviously, going number 2. So I think as a player that's you're a tall and you want to be scoring, but you want to be definitely playing defense. I think Alex Sarr did that job, and I think you could say, okay, will he be missed? I think he's replaceable, but I think he still did a job. And maybe when we get into it, maybe the next star that they have brought in is the perfect replacement. So, I think Alex Sarr definitely did well. He will be missed, but he can be replaced.
Yeah, I just think, obviously, you made some great points there, and I couldn't agree with you more. I wrote he was just in and out of the rotation too much. He was good, had great moments, but he can be replaced exactly like you've mentioned there. And I think the biggest thing with Alex is I would have loved to have seen him have a stretch last season where he started for the Perth Wildcats. And just not even just 1 or 2 games in a row. Give him a good 5 to 10 game period where he starts for the Perth Wildcats, because when I look back to last season, Keanu Pinder is a very solid player. He is a very solid player, but he's not a 5 for how the Perth Wildcats want to play. He is a proper 4. He needs to develop his 3-point shot more to be able to play how the Perth Wildcats want to play. He's a guy who Bryce will just call up for the screen. He'll either pop or he'll roll and Bryce will find him, or Bryce will just step back off that sort of screen and hit the 3-point shot. So it's a very tough role to come in, because there's probably no team in the NBL like the Perth Wildcats in terms of they have got a superstar talented player who is, the Russell Westbrook in terms of usage of the NBL. So, I just think it would have been great to have seen him obviously play at that sort of center position. The best rotation, I think, personally, would have been Webster at the 1, Ty Webster, Bryce Cotton at the 2, Doolittle at the 3, which is a nightmare for a lot of other 3s in the NBL because of how good defensively he was last season. Keanu Pinder at the 4 and Sarr at the 5. So I just didn't understand why they didn't. I understand why they went with Hiram Harris, and he gave us some good minutes. Jesse Wagstaff as well. But at the end of the day, it would have been great to have seen him obviously get a really good run at it at that starting center position. Now, there's obviously 2 other guys in which the Perth Wildcats have let go of this season, haven't re-signed. One of them is NBL legend and former NBL champion Corey Webster. Now, Corey, brother of Ty Webster, it was a really great story having both of them on the team for a couple of seasons there. About 5 or 6 years ago, Corey nearly signed for the Perth Wildcats as well, when he would have been in the peak of his powers in the NBL. It would have been a Bryce Cotton and Corey Webster duo that would have gone down in the ages as one of the better duos that we've seen at the guard and shooting guard position. But he leaves, I guess, the Perth Wildcats now, with many of us really looking at him going, he's probably very past his best right now. Statistically wise, last season, it wasn't too bad. 6.3 points per game, 1.4 rebounds, 1.1 assists. So not bad at all. But it's where he lacked, I think, on the defensive end. And like we've alluded to, Sarr, Usher, and now Webster, who are all bench players and role players, they were coming on and having massive runs and scores put on them, and he contributes that as well. So his best in terms of plus minus, he had a plus 20, but his next best plus was only plus 8. Limited minutes, I understand that, but a plus 20 is great, but obviously being plus 8 is not that great at all. But then you look at the worst, and this is where it all sews back to obviously that defensive rating and lack of defensive structure that they did have. -20, -17, -16, -16, -10, -10. Sometimes he would only play between 5 and 10 minutes in those particular games. That is horrible. So it's one of those things. I just don't think it's a couple of reasons. There was no spot in the rotation for him coming forward, and I think he wants to go try his sort of talent somewhere else, because he's still a very good offensive player, but he's got to be the number 1 guy. He can't be a guy who comes in and sort of is the 4th or 5th option at any given moment. So it's definitely a shame to see him leave the Perth Wildcats, and I would have loved to have seen him years ago. But the other guy is Kyle Zunic. Now, I haven't really had much time for Kyle in his whole time at the Perth Wildcats. I think they've always tried to unfairly push him up to be a starter for the Perth Wildcats. He's just never been up for that sort of thing. And I wrote down 2 words, and again, I think I'm on a little bit of a harsh trend here as well, and you've got to be a bit harsher on your own teams. And those 2 words were, who cares? Who cares he's gone? Who cares he's not been re-signed for the Perth Wildcats? So I just think he never really showed enough to the Perth Wildcats and to JR. But for some reason, JR would always give him bulk amount of minutes as well to be able to try and facilitate some offense as well. So it's going to be interesting, because obviously it opened up a couple of other spots. They've still got 1 spot right now, which I'm looking forward to talking about very soon. But in terms of who they've lost, it hasn't really been a massive sort of off-season in terms of losses, which is great for the Perth Wildcats. They've kept their really strong core together. But obviously, we're going to touch on who they've brought in now. And they've brought in some couple of solid players, I think, personally, to help out.
Yeah, Matt, I agree. And we have earlier this year, I guess you'd call it, Elijah Pepper. Josh, you did an interview with him talking about him signing with the Perth Wildcats and what he will bring to the organisation. A pretty durable player and a versatile player. How do you see Elijah Pepper as one of the key signings in the off-season for the Perth Wildcats? How do you see him fitting in to this team in the lineup here for NBL25?
Yeah, I can't wait. And shout out Elijah. He's been great. We've sort of kept contact the whole time, and he's just a super excited dude to be over here in Perth, and obviously looking forward to what the season throws up. And, two words come to mind when we're thinking of Elijah Pepper and obviously having that conversation as well. He's a shooter and he's a full-time scorer. So he went to UC Davis over in America for college. He averaged 20.7 points per game, 9 rebounds, 3 assists in his senior year. And he's the all-time scoring champion for UC Davis. So massive raps on this guy. When touching and talking to him, he sort of, I guess, was the biggest focal point realistically was being able to come on and being a consistent and a massive threat for other teams to worry about. Because it felt like last season that if Bryce wasn't on, the Perth Wildcats weren't on as well. So there needs to be another knockdown scorer and another option that they can go to every single game and to be able to help out Bryce Cotton. So I think he's the guy. I think it'll be great for Bryce as well. Instead of playing 40 minutes per game or 38 or 39 minutes, he might be able to play 33 or 34 minutes and be able to sort of weather the load a little bit, especially coming into the playoffs. Because when you're touching on that fade out towards the end of the season, I think Bryce's overall fitness and health was a massive reason as to why they didn't maybe have the success in the playoffs or the end of the season, because he just looked burnt out towards the back end. So I'm super excited for Elijah to be over. He's excited, most importantly, to be playing for the Perth Wildcats as well. The only question I do have is it's his first professional season as a professional player. So that comes with a lot of expectation, a lot of hype, but also a lot of nerves. But one thing that it did touch on and sort of really impressed me talking to him was his work ethic and how he's always said he wants to be the first person in the gym and the last person to leave as well. So I'm looking forward to this one, boys. I think he could be everything or nothing, but I'm sort of leaning towards the fact that he's going to be a very crucial part for the Perth Wildcats this season. But what are your thoughts on Pepper, mate? Because you had a good article written about our interview as well.
Yeah, obviously, getting all that information and putting in a lot of sort of back end work on Elijah Pepper and really learning about who he was and what he is. One of the sort of the key things I think for them, like you said, Perth still have some spots open. Him being a local player, despite obviously being born in Australia, but spending most of his life, in a small town up in Washington. Not Washington DC, in the bush, the forest of Washington up there at the top of the west coast. So he's come from a very, very humble beginning. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he goes. This is the first sort of big city he's ever lived in. And obviously you have all of those. It can be a positive. It can also be a distraction. But most of all, it's an adjustment. So I understand where you're coming from with Pepper, that it is a bit scary. But I think he is the perfect piece. I think it's a really, really smart piece, especially if it works, because you look at the stats for the Wildcats, and you've got Bryce Cotton averaging 22.9 points a game, and then you go down the list and you've got Keanu Pinder as their second best scorer, which is fine. Big guy down low, can get points. And then you have players like Jordan Usher, Alexander Sarr, Christian Doolittle. Like there's a pretty big problem, especially. But the sort of the funny thing is, or the catch is, Perth were one of the best offensive teams in the league last year, but it was all coming from one guy. So you can understand why also your comments saying, Cotton was pretty burnt out at the end. And that's going to happen when you have the weight of your whole team and the whole sort of scoring of your team on your shoulders night in and night out. So I think getting him and being able to stretch the floor, I think is the is going to be the key. You might see maybe less points from Bryce, more points from Pepper. You might even start to see the floor open up down low, and we'll see Pinder even upping his averages next year, because you've got another threat on the perimeter. And like you said, a pure prolific scorer. If he can get going in some games, it's going to be really interesting to see how Perth play and how really formats this offense, because if you're going to have these two prolific scorers, or two, say, natural scorers playing alongside each other, it could be a big threat, but it has to work. Like we've talked about in some other previews, sometimes it doesn't work when you've got these two guys that are scoring points. You need to find that gel and that chemistry, and that's going to be really important. But going into the interview that everybody can listen to wherever you listen to your podcasts, is that he is very, very humble, and Pepper is a guy that's looking to learn and looking to develop, and is almost, you get the feel that he's honoured to play alongside a player like Bryce Cotton, and why wouldn't you? So I think having that attitude coming in, instead of maybe, all right, I'm going to be the guy, I'm going to be the scorer, can be a positive in this situation and make this actually work.
No, definitely. You took the words out of my mouth there, mate. If you guys do want to go back and listen to that episode, make sure you do check that one out. And also check out www.thebasketballfix.com as well for an amazing article that Jez put together as well, based around that one. But yeah, like I've mentioned, it's really exciting. A local talented young player. He represented Australia as well in the Oceania Cup, I think it is, or he played in that sort of team as well, with some of the younger guns that the NBL and Australia does have. So yeah, I just think the upside for this kid could be anything, and I think he's going to have a really good role. He's going to take a little bit of time to find his feet, like every young professional does, but when he does find his feet, I think he's going to be a very crucial member for this team, and he's going to play a very crucial role for the Perth Wildcats.
The other signing that the Wildcats have made in the offseason is a next star signing, and we have spoken in multiple episodes how important it is to have a next star on your team. And again, we've seen it with Alex Sarr being drafted number 2. It's a massive financial windfall for an NBL team to have a next star drafted. They've brought in now a much younger player in Izan Almansa, a Spanish native, played in the NBA G League, and now has been recruited to the NBL, has some massive, stats from his Spanish team, under 19s, under 17s, under 18s, and most recently under 20s. Guys, I want you to kind of give us, for those that don't know about Izan Almansa, can you give us some background about who he is, his achievements on the court so far, and what he will bring to this Perth Wildcats team, Josh?
Yeah, I've sort of dubbed him, it's very easy to obviously say this, but Sarr 2.0. So he, like you mentioned, he's a Spanish national. He most recently played for the G League. So he's actually a little bit older. So I think he's already 19 right now. So Sarr is obviously 19 and got drafted as an 18, 19-year-old. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does. So he played for the G League. He averaged 10.5, 7.2, and 1.5 assists. So he's going to be, I think, a very versatile player. Now, I don't know if he's going to be the same as Sarr, but listening and reading some of these accolades that he's already got to his name. He was an MVP for the Under-17s World Cup. He was an MVP for the 2018 European Championships. And he was also an MVP as well for the Under-19s World Cup. So he's coming in with a lot of hype, a lot of expectations. And he sort of starts, his what's the sort of word, mock draft sort of lifestyle outside of the lottery round currently. He's currently ranked as the 17th best prospect for this up-and-coming draft, which is a very stacked draft, we may add as well. So it's very similar to where Sarr started when he came in, and obviously worked his way up to being the second pick last season. It's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do because, again, it's a lot more hype. And again, I think it's going to be a bit of a different role this season. I think what the Perth Wildcats need to go and do is either sign a really solid small forward or power forward, or a centre. So it's going to depend on his minutes and his role are going to depend on who they sign as that third import. But it's definitely very exciting. But Jez, what are some of your thoughts, mate? Because you've been a little bit impressed by him to start, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, well, I just think it's almost the perfect intro you did was Alexander Sarr 2.0. I think when you're looking at his attributes, and there's obviously it's very, very hard to compare these kids when they're coming in because of very, very different experiences, playing in different leagues, playing in different countries. You can't sort of sit and go, all right, it's not like we're sitting here and going through all of their game tape and being able to compare them. You see highlight reels and you see statistics maybe from the G League or something like that in one season or a European league. So, but I think definitely his build is almost exactly the same. His scoring is almost exactly the same to how Sarr was when he came in. He's known to be can handle himself defensively, and he's coming in for the exact same reason, coming in to play against men, and get stronger and obviously improve on exactly those things, scoring and defense. So it feels like he's exactly a carbon copy, and maybe that's why Perth went out and took the opportunity to sign him, because it's almost like a carbon copy replacement there. So I think it is going to be really, really, I love these next star stories, and I think it's going to be interesting to see if he then moves all the time, if he can get some good time and some good minutes, if he does move up this sort of mock draft, ranking. I think we just saw, what was it? Bleacher Report did their mock draft, just to give a shout out to Rocco Zakarski from the Brisbane Bullets, who's ranked as high as, I think it was 7th on their list, heading in. So it's, you show sort of the class. We all know what Rocco did, and Rocco being so young, and then you've got someone like Izan Almanza that's also coming in ranked very high. So it looks like we're going to have another great draft year in 25, 25, with a whole bunch of with a whole bunch of new NBL drafted players. So it's an exciting signing, and I think it's going to be really great to watch his path and see how he grows, and see if he can live up to the Perth Wildcats development program of Alexander Sarr and going number 2. Maybe not that high, but it'd be great to see him improve on that 17th spot.
And if you do like the next content, if you want more of it from the Basketball Fix, let us know in any of the comments on social media, YouTube, or wherever. We're always looking out for stuff that we can improve on and deliver the best type of content that we can to our viewers and listeners. Now, we've looked at the player movement for the Wildcats. Not a lot of movement, but they still had some things they needed to address to be, in our eyes, successful in the NBL25 campaign. One of the things that, Josh, you noted was they needed to bring in some extra scoring for Cotton. Do you think they've achieved that with the recruitment of Pepper?
I think they have to a certain extent, but obviously with another import sort of space, I think that's the sort of pipeline that I'd like to see them go down, because it's very tough to obviously fulfill all your needs with just 3 imports, especially when you've got Doolittle, who I think is very solid, and then obviously Cotton as well, who is the best player in the competition last season, obviously with an MVP. So I'm not sure if they've 100% addressed that, but I'm going to give you guys another name as well to keep an eye on going forward as well. Now, Joel Murray, I'm sure you guys may have heard about him or may have not heard about him, but over here in the West, he plays for the Mandurah Magic. Now, a bit of a backstory on the Mandurah Magic for listeners and you guys who might not know, they have been probably the worst NBL 1 franchise in the last 5 to 10 years. In the men's sort of grade, I should be mentioning there as well. Now, Joel comes over this season, in his first ever season, takes them from the bottom place team last year and takes them all the way to a grand final, and they win the grand final. Now, Joel put up, and this is when I'm touching on scoring, and a guy who's in our own backyard. He did it on the biggest stage at RAC Arena as well in the grand final game against Willetton, where he hit a very tough layup to put them, give them a 2-point lead with 45 seconds to go, and they held down and won that game. But you ready for these stats, boys? Because this is what the scoring needs, I think, of the Perth Wildcats are. So, MVP of the season, grand final MVP, grand final winner. 33.5 points per game, 7 assists, 4 rebounds, 2.3 steals. So that is incredible, and I think it warrants giving him a chance potentially at being an import player in the NBL, because no random person is dropping 33 points on a whole season. So I think that's the need that they need to go down. If they're going to go the scoring route, I think he's a guy who's coming in hot. He's ready to go. I think he's excited about being in Perth. He loves being in Perth from all reports that we've been speaking, all the reports that I've been listening to and reading and all that sort of stuff as well. So I think that's a major key. But the other
Do you
major
think?
key
Sorry,
that I
just before
mentioned is obviously,
sorry, just before you go, do you not think that a caliber player of him and the way he scores not going to interfere with Cotton's output?
I don't think so, because it sort of was at a point early on in the season when they were trying to figure him out. He was sort of playing off the ball a little bit, and then it wasn't until that he took that sort of the ball in his hands a lot that he really shone. So yes and no is, again, not sitting on the fence. I don't think he will personally. I don't think it will mess up Cotton, because I think a guy like him is a walking bucket, and Cotton's played with some absolute scorers in his time as a Perth Wildcat. And I think one thing that we forget about Bryce Cotton is how good of a playmaker he is when he needs to be. So a guy like him can come in and realistically play off the ball to Cotton. Cotton can play off the ball to him. They will both work so hard off the screen, so hard off the ball. I think it really will work really nicely as well. So I personally like the fit, to be honest with you. I think it's one of those fits that will work well. Cotton may drop in some scoring, and this guy might come in. They could both average around 18, 19 points per game, which would be massive for the Wildcats on the offensive end. But touching on the defensive problems in which the Wildcats have had for a couple of seasons now, and in particularly the rebounding sort of problems, I'd love for them to go and attack a guy like Tyler Cook that we've spoken about in last episode for the Illawarra Hawks, and even bringing back a local talent, Angus Brandt as well, who has been rumoured to have come back to the Perth Wildcats. He obviously played with the Perth Wildcats about 4 or 5 years ago, won a championship ring with the Perth Wildcats as well. So he's another massive guy who would really sit well in that paint, be able to make Keanu Pinder that 4, which I've been touching on, and Tyler Cooks will do the exact same thing as well. So it's an interesting mix, because it's sort of coming down to what do they want to make better? Do they want to become a better scoring team and help Cotton out? Or do they think they've got enough options now if they get them all going? Or is it them really locking in on the defensive end and really becoming a better rebounding team that's most important for JR and the Perth Wildcats this season? So I think obviously there's a lot to still work on and still to play out. But yeah, I just think it's going to be interesting to see what they can do.
Now, Jez, we don't have a lot of movement of the players in and out. Who do you kind of see on this team needs to take the next step to push this team further down the finals track to eventually another grand final in NBL 25?
Like, there's two sides that you look at. I think on the offensive side, or productivity side, I think a player like Ty Webster needs to step up. I feel that he had a little bit of a quiet season for Perth last year. You would have expected a little bit more output from him. So it sort of just feels like, like you talk about Bryce Cotton being an excellent playmaker. You needed Ty Webster to be maybe a little bit of a better playmaker as well. And then, not being maybe so far down the list in scoring, considering that you're still a guard and you should be able to be sinking buckets. So I think definitely on that side of thing, I think he needs to step up. And then when it comes to, the defensive side, I think, when you look at Perth, they relied so heavily on their scoring and ultimately on Bryce Cotton to score, because they were very average, as we joke about a lot and give a lot of flack, but they were very, very average defensively. So I think as a team as a whole, I think they've got to have a little bit more focus next season on stopping the opposition. It's as simple as you can go into the X's and O's of it, but stop the opposition scoring so you don't have to go down these routes where you're relying on Bryce to dig you out of a hole or put you into a lead, because hey, maybe our bench isn't going to do a whole lot, or our bench is going to give up a whole lot of points because we don't have the depth. So I think for them to be they're obviously a true contender. We saw what they did when they were on their hot run last year, and other teams have gotten better, but Perth Wildcats are still the Perth Wildcats, and they are one of these top tier teams in the NBL and are going to be for a long time. But if they want to make sure that they're not going to let the same thing happen as it did in NBL 24, I think defense has to be their focus, and that's how they do it. I think you sort of got to get a little bit more, maybe a little bit more aggression out of Pinder. It's going to be interesting to see what they do, obviously with Almanza, and then how it's going to work with Pepper defending, and how many minutes he's going to play. So I think that's where the groundwork of their preseason needs to be over the last month before going on when they're going on all of their preseason trips. I think they're going to Japan to play against some tough competition, which I think is a really, really good thing for them. So I definitely think that if their defense as a whole needs to step up, and then maybe a playmaker like Webster needs to be a little bit more productive.
Well, there is no doubt a lot to look forward to for the Perth Wildcats. Let's now change tack a little bit to nearing the end of the show now. We want to give an off-season grade that we have to all of the teams heading into NBL25. Now, I'm very excited to hear what you boys are going to say here, because obviously the love-hate relationship that Josh has with his team, and then the analytical aspect, I guess, from Jez. Josh, I'll throw to you first, mate. How do you kind of see the general off-season for them? Like, in my opinion, I don't think they didn't bottom out, at least. So that's something positive. How do you kind of see it, and what's your final grade on the Wildcats off-season?
Yeah, you're 100% correct, mate. I think the most important thing was that they got team players from last season back into the squad. So I think personally the biggest signing, or the biggest re-signing, was obviously the signing of Christian Doolittle back on a 2-year contract, I think it was, because what he brings on the offensive and defensive end, you just can't replace. So that's a massive signing in my books. I think 100% A+ for not signing Jordan Usher again this season. I think it was the right call to let Corey Webster go. Unfortunately, lost Saar. But besides that, they didn't really lose too much on any end of the court either. And then obviously as well, to only have brought back in Elijah Pepper and Izan Amansa just as currently we're speaking, it's still a very solid, I guess, input as well, because you're sort of replacing the Saar loss. And then I think what Jordan Usher did on the offensive end, you can probably get from Elijah Pepper if everything works out as well. So with all things considered, I've given them a B-. Now, I would have loved to have given them a little bit of a higher grade, but I think what will come in the next couple of weeks is obviously the signing of one of these import players. But the thing that is starting to worry me again is the Wildcats aren't afraid to sign an import very late in the piece as well, after the preseason's done, after the preseason games are done, and even sometimes after the start of the season is done as well, because they like to sort of figure out, hey, what are we sort of lacking right now? And let's go find that certain player. So they've always been a team that even if an import's not sort of performing well, they cut them midway through the season and bring another player in. So it obviously comes with its questions and worries, because we saw last year with Christian Doolittle trying to implement him into the rotation and giving him a good chance to obviously improve and obviously learn the sets. It really resulted in us having a pretty poor start. But at the other end of the spectrum, though, they are a very attacking team, and they go, this is what we need. Let's go find that right now. So Danny Mills will do what he needs to do as the GM of the Perth Wildcats. JR knows what he needs. But yeah, for me currently for their off-season, boys, so obviously not ramble on even more, because I can talk all night and all day about the Perth Wildcats, I'm going to conclude with a B- for their off-season.
Well, it is a long season, even though that we have spoken about in our Make NBL Great Again episode that they probably could fit in a few more matches here or there. But I mean, you need to be able to peak at the right time of the season. And if you miss the start, there's so many opportunities for you towards the end of the season to make it in, either via the play-in tournament or whatever. So I don't think, in my opinion, it's an especially bad kind of way to look at it for the Wildcats or strategy, if you will, to hold out on that final signing. Jez, your kind of reflection on the off-season and your final grade for the Wildcats.
No, I think I'm a little bit more positive than Josh, to be honest. The whole idea of this show was that we were going to roast the Perth Wildcats and give it to him. But in all honesty, when you look at it, I think it's a positive for them that there was little movement. I think it now comes down to, their structure and what they're going to do with their team and how they're going to organise themselves. And that goes obviously on to JR's shoulders, and it's time for him to stand up. He had a little bit of a rough season and almost got the sack after their poor start, and then obviously turned them into the second best ranked team going into the finals. So, but now it's time to just, all right, they need to they need to attack, and they need to make sure that they're a better, well-rounded team. And yeah, obviously getting rid of Usher, we all agreed that was a positive. And I think you're bang on saying that when it comes to the offensive side of things and probably the defensive side of things after this chat, Elijah Pepper's definitely going to be able to fill that, at least that role. So I think that's been a positive swap if you're looking at, okay, we lost a player, gained a player. We've talked about the next star swap there as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see who this next import is and which road they do go down, if they're looking for another scorer or try and find someone that's going to improve on their defense. But I think it's just the most important thing for them is that they be patient with this last signing and don't just bring somebody in because we've got to bring somebody in. I think it's got to be the right fit, and that's JR's decision of, okay, which type of player is it going to be. But I think it's very important that they just take their time, make the right decision, and we will likely see the Perth Wildcats up in the top end of the table again. And listening to Josh rant on about how good they are all season long. But yeah, I give their grade a B at the moment, and it'll all depend. It could go up and down depending on that final import signing.
It's also a B from me. I think they haven't gone backwards, and their biggest thing was just to make sure they have the players that were successful last season, bring them back, add a little bit around the edges, and they will also be contending again this season. Well, boys, that brings us to the end of today's episode about the Perth Wildcats. We have only 2 teams left as we edge closer to the start of NBL25. Next up, it'll be Melbourne United, followed by eventual winners, the Tassie Jack Jumpers. And I know Jez is getting extremely excited about that episode, and he'll taste a bit, I guess, from Josh. All in good fun. And again, lots and lots of NBL content coming your way in the lead up to NBL 25. Josh, what can our listeners and viewers look forward to coming into NBL 25 and then also throughout the season?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly touch on as well the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers. It may be the first time, for a quick little spoiler for you guys as well, that I give an F grade for the off season, because they've lost a lot and haven't really gained much either. But a lot coming up, obviously, guys. It's going to be. I've got to throw a couple of haymakers, boys, because I think you guys have been relatively nice, but that's because the Wildcats are a good team and franchise. But plenty coming up on the basketball fix, isn't there? Really. We're going to be doing and touching on, and I'll be doing my own little segment. I've called it the Higgins Hot Takes of the Week. Obviously, we're going to be doing our preview and review show, and we've got a lot of stuff coming up as well. So make sure you check out our website, www.thebasketballfix.com, our Instagram page, The Basketball Fix Podcast, the YouTube channel as well, The Basketball Fix, and obviously continue to follow us and rate, review, and follow wherever you get your podcast from as well, because it's going to be a massive season from us here at Basketball Fix. We're going to be moving in a lot of different directions. We're going to be pulled a lot of different directions as well. We're going to be on the radio station over here in Perth. When the season comes off, it's going to be jam-packed, to be honest with you guys, and I think we're all looking forward to the challenges that are going to be coming ahead. But most importantly, I think watching the second best league in the world continue to grow, and us at the Basketball Fix as well, realistically giving you guys everything that you guys need to hear on a weekly basis.
That's it. And we're obviously also keeping a keen ear out and an eye out for any type of information or suggestions that anybody from our listener base or viewer base wants to throw at us. We're keen to accommodate to our lovely fans. Now, guys, that was today's episode. Thank you for hanging around and listening, and we hope you've got your basketball fix.
With stars come to play. He's the biggest of them all. Step back, 4-3. Phoenix forced a turnover at halfway. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Took it.
Clock at 10. Adams the off balance.
Oh, my goodness.